Hi, boys and girls. This is Mrs. D. Today we will learn how to multiply a mixed number by a whole number, as well as a mixed number times a fraction. So let's jump in. If I have this example, 2 times 2.5, you might think this is an easy problem, but it may not be the exact answer you think it is. So let's get working on this before we actually figure out what our answer is. So if I have 2.5, I actually cannot multiply with this mixed number. I need to do something to this mixed number first before I multiply with it. I need to find an equivalent amount. And whenever I multiply with a mixed number, I actually need to change that mixed number to an improper fraction. So I hope you remember how to do that from 4th grade and from a previous video that I have shared with you. So let's talk about how to do this. There are 2 operations when I change a mixed number to an improper fraction. I need to multiply, and I also need to add. My order of operations tells me that I should multiply before I add. So if I do that, I start at the denominator and take 2 times the whole number of 2, which gives me 4. And then I add in my 1, which gives me a numerator of 5, and my denominator stays 2. That's our first step, and we do that because 2.5 is an equivalent amount to 5 over 2. And then I have my whole number of 2. And just like in previous lessons, you know that that whole number is actually a fraction. And we can make it a fraction by putting it a denominator of 1. And now this looks like something you have just done in previous lessons. Now I need to multiply these 2 fractions. So when I started this problem, this did not look like I had 2 fractions at all. I had a whole number and I had a mixed number. But just by making equivalent amounts, now I have a fraction times another fraction. Even though it's improper, it's still a fraction. So I'm going to multiply just the way you had learned before, straight across. 2 times 5 gives me 10, and 2 times 1 gives me 2. But this is an improper fraction. So if I were to change this improper fraction to a mixed number, we are going to take 10, that's the numerator, and divide it by my denominator of 2. And 2 goes into 10 5 times. 5 times 2 is 10. And when I subtract, I get nothing left over. So my answer here is a whole number of 5, and I don't have a fraction to go with it because I had nothing left over down here. And when I have nothing in a fraction, that fraction does not actually exist. So my answer here is just 5. Now, when I asked you to think about in the beginning what you thought this answer might be, I want to make sure that you do not do this number times this number. Because if you did the whole number of 2 times this whole number of 2, you would get 4. But then what do you do with that half? Do you just tack it on the end? Would you call your answer 4.5? We can't do that because we just proved that our answer is 5, not 4.5. So please make sure that when you do your work, you do not just jump right in and do a whole number times a whole number and tack on that fraction because you're not going to get the right answer if we do it that way. Let's look at another example. Here I have 4 times 2 1/3. Again, do not jump to just multiplying your 4 times your 2 and then tacking on that 1/3. That's not going to give you the right answer because you're not actually multiplying with any part of this 1/3 if you just stick it in your answer. So that's why that does not work. Instead, the first thing we're going to do is make an equivalent amount with this mixed number. So I know we need to multiply and we need to add. And we can do this. Oops, sorry about that plus sign. We can do this because we learned this in 4th grade. We learned it in 5th grade. We know that 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7. That becomes my new numerator. And my denominator stays 3. Now this improper fraction is an equivalent amount to 2 1/3. I can drop my multiply sign. And I'm not just going to leave this as a whole number of 4. but I'm going to make it a fraction by putting a denominator of 1 underneath it, because whenever we put a denominator of 1, that equals a whole number. And just like you have learned, we multiply straight across in the top, straight across in the bottom. So here, my numerator, go ahead, yell it out. What's it going to be? You said 28. You're right. And my denominator should be what? Hopefully you said 3, because 3 times 1 is 3. But this is an improper fraction, so I need to change it. So I'm going to take my 28. That goes on the inside. Where's my dividend? And my 3 is going to become my divisor, or my outside. 3 does not go into 2, but 3 goes into 28. How many times? Think about that. Hopefully you said 9, because 3 goes into 28 9 times. And when I multiply 9 times 3, I get 27. When I subtract these two amounts, I get 1 left over. Now I need to make my mixed number, because here 9 is not just my answer, because I have something left over here. So now I need to take this 1 that's left over, and that becomes my numerator. And my denominator, I did all this work over here to get my denominator to be 3, so I'm going to leave it 3. My answer here would be 9 1/3. And that 9 1/3 is a whole lot different than just 4 times 2 and tacking on that 1/3 at the end. So that's why it's important you don't jump to conclusions, and you actually do the math work of changing the mixed number to an improper fraction. So that's how we multiply a whole number times a mixed number. Now let's jump in, and what if we have a mixed number times a fraction? So here, let's change our color. Let's go green. So here, if I have 1/3 times 4 1/2, I still need to do something with this mixed number. I still need to change it to an improper fraction first. And you know how to do this. What I'd like you to do is either pause the video or get a piece of paper and a pencil and do this work with me. So if you need to pause, go ahead and pause now. Make sure you have some paper or a whiteboard and a marker, and do this work with me. The first thing we're going to do is change this mixed number to an improper fraction by multiplying the denominator of 2 times our whole number of 4. 2 times 4 gives us 8, and we're going to add in that 1, which should give us a numerator of 9, and my denominator stays the same. And here, I already have a fraction of 1/3. It is a fraction. I don't need to put it over 1, because then I would have 3 numbers, and that wouldn't be right. So I leave 1/3 alone. I don't touch it at all. But instead, now I multiply straight across, because now I have my 2 fractions, and I know that 1 times 9 is 9, and 3 times 2 is 6. Well, 9 over 6 can't be right, because that's improper. So let's change it from improper to a mixed number. 9 goes on the inside and my 6 on the outside. 6 goes into 9 one time. 1 times 6 is 6. And when I subtract, I get 3. So if I were to make my mixed number now, my 3 over here, this becomes my numerator, 3. And again, I'm not going to change my denominator. It was 6 here, it was 6 here, so I'm going to leave it 6. So my answer here is 3 1/6. I know that 3 1/6, 1 3/6. Sorry, I was saying that wrong. 1 3/6. 1 3/6, I can simplify that to equal 1 1/2, because 3 is half of 6. If I take that numerator and divide it by 3, I would get 1. And if I take this denominator and I divide it by 3, I would get 2. So my answer would be 1 1/2. Let me prove to you why our answer is 1 1/2. Let's go back to this problem. 1/3 times 4 1/2. Really what I'm saying is I want 1/3 of 4 1/2. So if I have a really large model, if I go back to that problem, I'm saying 1/3 of 4 1/2. So really this whole amount of this model that I'm showing you would equal 4 1/2. I was multiplying by 1/3. I write my problem up here to show you. I was multiplying by 1/3. So really what I want to do is split this model into thirds. And once I do that, then I need to know, well, how much is that whole amount? I know it's 4 1/2. Well, then how much is each part to equal my 4 1/2? And that's what we found out, that each part would be 1 1/2. This is why our answer when we multiply is much less than the factors that we are multiplying with. 1 1/2 is much less than 4 1/2. And when we find our answer, you'll see that these amounts of 1 1/2 here and 1 1/2 here and the last 1 1/2 here will give me 4 1/2. I can make an equation out of it. 1 1/2 plus 1 1/2 plus 1 1/2. So here I can do 1 plus 1 plus 1. That gives me 3. But I also know that 1/2 plus 1/2 equals 1 whole. That gives me 1. And then I have this extra half that I didn't do anything with, so I still add that on the end. So if I add it, 3 plus 1 plus 1 1/2 gives me 4 1/2. So we just proved why that works. Let's look at another example here. 3 1/4 times 1/3. Okay, first step, what I would like you to do here is to pause this video, see if you can get the same answer as me. You go ahead and do your work, and then you can check it by unpausing the video and seeing if our work matches. So the first thing I need to do is make this mixed number into an improper fraction. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 1 is 13, and my denominator stays the same. And I don't change my 1/3. I leave that the same. Just like you have previously learned, we multiply straight across. 1 times 13 is 13. 4 times 3 is 12. This is an improper fraction because my 13 is larger than my 12. My numerator is larger than my denominator. So we change it. 12 goes into 13 one time. 1 times 12 is 12. Subtract and get 1 left over, which makes my fraction 1/12. So my answer to this problem is 1 1/12. And again, you see that this answer or this product is much less than 3 1/4, because what we did is take 1/3 of 3 1/4. And I'll show you that in a model again. Really large rectangle. Go back to what my problem was. 3 1/4 times 1/3. So the same thing. This, sorry, that's supposed to be a 4. Kind of funny looking. This whole amount is going to be my 3 1/4. I'm going to split it into thirds because that's what I'm multiplying by. I'm trying to find 1/3 of 3 1/4. And let's check and see if our answer is right. We had 1 1/12. So if I do 1 1/12, And again, 1 and 1/12. And again, 1 and 1/12. Let's see if we get it. We can add our whole numbers. 1, 2, 3. So there's my whole number of 3. And 1/12 plus 1/12 plus 1/12. That's all the same denominator, so I can just add those right up. Gives me 3/12. 3 and 3/12 the same as 3 and 1/4? It is if I simplify. I know a common denominator between 3 and 12 would be, or a common factor, I should say, excuse me. Common factor between 3 and 12 would be 3. If I take each of those and divide it by 3, my whole number stays the same. 3 divided by 3 is 1, and 12 divided by 3 is 4. So we match 3 and 1/4 and 3 and 1/4. So in this lesson, you have learned how to multiply a mixed number times a whole number and a mixed number by a fraction.